Back in August of 2021, I was a freshman at Queens College, which is in New York City. I am currently a senior and I will graduate in the spring with a degree in film studies. For your information, I live in Chicago and I only go home during week-long breaks. Backtracking from where I first started. Orientation day came and I had butterflies in my stomach. I wasn't too sure if I would fit in or make any friends. I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. During orientation day, I met up with all the kids in my major and they all seemed like approachable peers. Only this one guy caught my attention more than the rest of them. His name was Dylan. I could tell when we first met that he was a very weird guy and he was also pretty cringy. He said the most random things and he would try to make others laugh, but he failed too. He probably was just a huge film and television nerd and just had that personality of it. Sadly, I wish that this was the case, but it wasn't. Days, or should I say weeks, went by and this Dylan kid would get more annoying each day. He would keep saying the most random things out of the blue. I don't know what his deal was and I just wanted him to just shut up for once. There were also some positive things that had happened. For instance, about every freshman, including me who was studying film studies, all formed into a friend group. Dylan was also in it. We didn't really invite him to join, as he pretty much just invited himself. Nobody in the friend group really saw him as a friend and we all pretty much just tolerated him. He kept getting on everyone's nerves as he was just spewing nonsense that only he wanted to talk about. One night, I met up with 3 friends in the friend group for dinner at the college's cafeteria. Their names are Alex and Eric, who were men, and Mary Kate, who is a woman. We talked about a few topics at the table. One topic that was talked about was Dylan. We all complained about how we couldn't stand him and his weird creature-like behavior. Then when Mary Kate spoke, she said something about Dylan that sent shivers down my spine. She informed us that he had been following girls around campus to their rooms. She also said that the majority of the students in the college think Dylan is a psychopath. They probably think this because the girls who Dylan had followed probably told their other people and it was most likely spread around campus. My ears couldn't believe what it was hearing. The days kept passing by and Dylan was still being his usual oddball self. One day at lunch, he sat down at the table where we were sitting because there was an open chair. I let out a small sigh and muttered under my breath, "Here we go again." He sat down and started to babble on about how people were giving him creeped out looks. "I wonder why," I said this to him in my head. Believe it or not, he was still talking about stuff that sounded like personal problems. We all ignored him and his goofiness. Then out of nowhere, he then asked us in a firm tone, "Why are you all acting like children and ignoring me?" This reached a boiling point for me. I decided that I've had enough of this idiot and I will have the balls to tell him off. I don't know how I did it, but I snapped and said to him, "Listen, I don't know what you want from us, but none of us want to talk to you and I think you know why. You're so annoying, you butt into our conversations and bring up random topics that are not even being talked about. Do you also ever just shut the hell up? Like seriously, dude, just leave us the hell alone and fuck off." I didn't predict what he would do next, but that's a given. I saw him get up from his chair, which was 2 seats away from me, and rushed at me, and he grabbed his hands around my neck and I felt myself starting to choke. He then said to me in an angry and loud voice, "What is wrong with your tiny human brain?" I heard the whole cafeteria go silent and slightly saw everyone's faces looking at me as I was grasping and breathing for air. This happened for only 5 seconds until I felt his grip of his hands release from my neck as I saw about 5 to 6 men pull him off of me and hold him down at a table right next to the one we were sitting at. I heard one of the guys say to him, "You're not going anywhere until we get security to escort you out." The pain in my neck was really kicking in at that moment. My friends Peter and Mark came over to me and asked me if I was all right. I told them that we needed to report this to the dean of students. We walked over to the dean's office, and as we were walking, We saw a security guard officer running into the cafeteria. Some faculty member must have rang him over. We got to the office and we saw that she was just typing something on her computer. She probably wasn't busy, but I knocked on the door anyway. She opened the door and we saw her eyes open wide like she had just seen a ghost. I could tell that she wanted to say a bunch of curse words, but she kept her cool and asked all three of us what happened. I simply told her that I got assaulted. We then saw her shake her head and said, "Dear Lord," as she was walking toward her mini refrigerator on her ground. She opened it up and we saw her take something out of the freezer part. There were 2 ice packs. She handed them to me and I thanked her because she was really kind. Next, she told us to have a seat and to give us a report. I told her everything that she had to know and Peter and Mark were being my witnesses. After that, we went over to the security control room. As we walked in, we saw 2 guards working behind the CCTV reviewing the surveillance footage of the moment Dylan started choking me, and then when the guys who were sitting at a different table got him off me and restrained him on a table. The dean then asked the guards who were across the room, "Oh, so you guys already knew what happened?" One of the guards replied back with, "Yes, we saw everything unfold through the camera footage. We were in that room for some time and after we finished, the dean told me that she will keep me notified about Dylan and if he gets suspended or something." I thanked her for her time and I went back to my dorm room for the rest of the day. The next morning, I woke up and checked my school email like I always do, the first thing when I wake up. I saw that I had a new unread email from Dylan. I sighed and said, "Oh no." I opened it up and the subject was simply put as, "Apology letter." It read out, "Hey, I just wanted to say how truly sorry I am for what I did to you. I went too far and I let my emotions get the best of me. Do you want to be friends again?" I was intrigued reading this, but not in a good way. I can tell that his apology was not genuine because who would ask someone if they want to be friends again in an apology letter? I decided right then and there that I will not respond back to his email. There was also no way in hell I would forgive him. The rest of the day went on and quite a bit of people would come up to me and ask if I was okay. I told them that I was better than yesterday and my neck is in less pain. I also was wearing some bandages on where my marks were. Having a lot of people coming up to me asking questions about yesterday did stress me out a little bit, but on the bright side, they seemed very caring. A few days went by and then one day I got an email from the dean of students and the email was about how Dylan had been expelled from this college for his actions. I was happy to hear this. The administration definitely did a superb job of handling this. It also sought closure for me. I want to say that this story ends here, but unfortunately it doesn't and it gets even scarier. It was still the same year and it was now Thanksgiving break. I went back home to Chicago. One night at around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I was in my bedroom and I heard a knock at my window. This was extremely unusual. Never in my life had I ever got a knock at my window, and even worse, it was beyond inappropriate at this time of night. I was really nosy to see who it was. I walked to the window, pulled the shade up, and who I saw made me feel like I needed to leave this country. It was none other than Dylan. As soon as I saw him, I pulled the shades down and ran to get my parents. I saw them sitting in the living room and I told them in a very fast speed of voice what I just saw and who I saw. They didn't seem to believe me, but my mother said she will check with me. We got back to the room and went to the window. I stood right next to my mother and she pulled up the shade. Dylan was gone and nowhere in sight. She told me, "You see? Look, nothing is there. You're probably just paranoid and I get that." I said back to her, "Yeah, you're probably right. It might just be my mind playing tricks on me." She then walked out of the room and shut the door. I kept thinking that whole night that if it was really him or was I just hearing or seeing things. If it was real, how was he able to get all the way from Chicago if he lived in New York? Which he told all of the film students, by the way. It did not seem right at all. I had a very hard time going to sleep that night and the days following. To this day, I still wonder if it was really Dylan outside of my window, or was it my brain just messing with me? You guys can be the judge. It started innocuously, the faint sense of being watched, like the prickle of static against my skin, something I shrugged off in the haze of my daily routine until I couldn't anymore. The first time I saw him was outside the coffee shop near my apartment, a gaunt figure cloaked in shadow. His hood pulled so low I could only make out his lips, curling into the faintest of smiles as I passed. That smile haunted me later, in the dark hours of the night when I was too tired to rationalize the fear gnawing at my chest. Days turned into weeks, and the coincidences began piling up. The same figure lingering near the grocery store as I picked out fruit, the fleeting glimpse of him in my building's lobby reflected in the elevator's closing doors, and once, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps behind me that abruptly stopped when I turned around. Each time, he never got too close, never did anything overtly threatening, but his presence was inescapable, a shadow that loomed over every waking moment. Then came the notes, slipped under my door, scrawled in jagged handwriting on torn paper. You looked beautiful today. I'm always here for you. You can't hide from me. I told myself I was imagining things when I started hearing whispers at night, faint and unintelligible, until I realized they were coming from inside my apartment. I searched every corner, every closet, even beneath the bed, but I found nothing. Nothing except the faint scent of tobacco and a lingering chill that settled in my bones. One night, I bolted upright to the sound of my name, hissed from the darkness. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, and that's when I saw him. Pressed against the window outside, his hands splayed on the glass, his face obscured except for those eyes, wide and unblinking, staring straight into mine. The police didn't believe me, of course. They never do they? No signs of forced entry, they said, dismissing my panic with polite condescension. I changed the locks, installed cameras, and even moved to a new apartment across the city, convinced I'd left him behind. For months, I felt safe again, until one night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, I saw a new notification. A photo sent from an unknown number. My blood froze. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my room in that exact moment. I dropped the phone, my breath hitching as I looked around, every shadow suddenly alive with menace. I didn't see him that night, but I felt him, felt his breath on the back of my neck as I bolted out of my apartment and ran to the nearest police station. They found no evidence, again, except for a single strand of hair on my pillow, hair that wasn't mine. The stalking became my life, consuming every thought and every action, until I stopped sleeping altogether, my eyes constantly scanning, my mind unraveling. Then one day the notes stopped, the photos stopped, the presence was gone, and I let myself believe it was over, until I woke up one morning to find him sitting at the foot of my bed, smiling that same twisted smile, holding a knife dripping with something dark and thick. He whispered, "I told you, you can't hide," before the room went black, and the last thing I felt was his breath on my face. It began with a subtle unease, a faint prickle on the back of my neck whenever I stepped outside, but it was easy to dismiss. After all, everyone feels paranoid sometimes. It wasn't until I noticed the man on the train, sitting in the same seat every morning, his eyes never leaving me, that I began to question if my unease was something more. He didn't smile or nod, didn't speak or even pretend to be discreet. He simply watched, his dark eyes unwavering as the train rattled through the city. At first, I thought it was coincidence that he happened to board at the same station and get off where I did. But when he appeared outside my workplace during lunch, leaning against a lamppost with that same unblinking stare, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Days turned into weeks, and his presence became a constant shadow in my life, a figure I couldn't escape no matter where I went. At the cafe where I stopped for coffee, across the street when I walked home, even outside my apartment window at night, standing so still he might have been a statue if not for the faint puff of his breath in the cold air. I stopped going out, stopped answering my phone when unknown numbers called, stopped sleeping as the paranoia clawed its way deeper into my mind, but none of it made a difference. One night, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate, heavy, and when I looked through the peephole, there he was, staring directly into it as if he could see me on the other side. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone, leaving behind only a single note taped to my door. "Why won't you let me in?" That night, I bolted every lock and dragged a chair under the doorknob, but sleep still evaded me, my heart racing at every creak of the building, every faint rustle of wind. Days passed and the notes kept coming, slipped under my door or left on my car windshield, each one more invasive than the last. "I know you like red wine. You hum when you clean. You dream about me." It wasn't just that he was watching. It was that he knew me in ways that no one else did, in ways that felt impossibly intimate. Then came the pictures, printed on glossy paper and tucked into my mailbox. At first, they were of me walking to work or sitting on my balcony, but soon they became more sinister. Me sleeping in my bed, brushing my teeth, staring out the window of my locked apartment. I called the police again, but they told me there was no evidence of a break-in, no fingerprints, no sign that anyone had been inside. "Maybe you left a window open," they suggested, their skepticism clear, but I knew better. I hadn't left anything open. The breaking point came one morning when I woke to find my mirror covered in lipstick, the words smeared in messy strokes. "I see you." The lipstick wasn't mine. I packed a bag and fled to a hotel across the city, but he found me there too, slipping another note under the door. "You can't hide from me. You'll never escape." I thought I was losing my mind, but then things took an even darker turn. One evening, as I scrolled through social media in a desperate attempt to distract myself, I found a video posted by an account I didn't recognize. The thumbnail was of me, sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the TV. My hands trembled as I played it, the footage clearly taken from inside my apartment, the camera moving with deliberate slowness as it zoomed in on my face. My breath hitched when I heard a voice in the background, his voice, low and raspy. "You look so peaceful. I could watch you forever." That was when I realized he wasn't just watching me. He was living in my apartment, hiding in the walls or the crawl space or somewhere I couldn't find him. Panic set in, and I decided to confront him, to rip my life out of his grasp. Armed with a knife, I searched every inch of the apartment, pulling open closets, ripping apart furniture, screaming at him to come out. That's when I saw it. A trapdoor in the corner of the laundry room, partially hidden beneath a pile of old boxes. My heart pounded as I pried it open, the smell of damp earth and decay wafting up to meet me. The tunnel was narrow and dark, the walls carved from dirt and lined with scratches, as if someone had clawed at them for years. At the end of the tunnel was a small room, and inside it, I found his nest. A filthy mattress, empty food wrappers, and a wall covered in photographs of me. Some of them so old I didn't even remember when they'd been taken. But the worst was the mirror. A cracked, grimy piece of glass hanging on the wall, and in its reflection, I saw him standing behind me, his face twisted into a grin that was an exact replica of my own. "I've always been here," he whispered, and before I could scream, everything went black. It began with a message, a seemingly innocent, misplaced text that read, "I saw you today. You looked even more beautiful than I imagined." At first, I thought it was a wrong number, one of those harmless mistakes that vanish as quickly as they arrive. But when another text came the next day, this time describing the exact blue dress I wore to work, my blood ran cold. I blocked the number, but the messages found their way back through new ones, each more unsettling than the last, each more personal. I started noticing things then, things I had never paid attention to before, like the car parked just far enough down the street to look incidental, the faint feeling of being watched even when I was home, the way my curtains never quite sat right no matter how carefully I adjusted them. My friends laughed it off at first, told me I was overthinking, that I was letting paranoia get the better of me. But paranoia doesn't explain waking up in the middle of the night to find your front door unlocked when you know for certain you locked it. It doesn't explain finding a single black glove on your kitchen counter, the kind you've never owned, sitting there as if waiting for you to notice it. I told myself it was all coincidence, a series of unrelated events that just happened to align, until the photos started appearing. The first was in my mailbox, an envelope with no return address, containing a picture of me sitting in my living room, taken from outside the window. The others followed, each one more invasive than the last. Me brushing my teeth in the bathroom, asleep in bed, walking my dog in the park. No matter where I was, no matter how private the moment, they were there, capturing every detail of my life. I installed cameras around my apartment, bought extra locks, even started carrying pepper spray wherever I went, but nothing seemed to deter him. If anything, it seemed to encourage him. I would come home to find things moved, just slightly, just enough to know someone had been there. My shoes rearranged by the door, the dish towel hanging differently, my bed sheets turned down when I hadn't done it. One night, I came home to find a single red rose lying on my pillow, its petals scattered as though plucked one by one. The police were no help, their sympathies laced with a disinterest that screamed, just another paranoid woman. But I knew this was no delusion. I felt his eyes on me everywhere, in the grocery store aisles, on the train ride home, even in my dreams, which had begun to dissolve into nightmares filled with dark figures and whispered threats. The breaking point came when I found the note taped to my bathroom mirror, written in my lipstick, "You're mine now. Stop fighting it." That was the night I packed my bags and drove to a motel 2 hours away, hoping to outrun the suffocating dread that had become my constant companion. But even there, in the unfamiliar room with its stale air and flickering neon sign outside, I couldn't escape him. At 3 a.m., a knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps that froze the breath in my lungs. I didn't answer, didn't dare move, but the knocking came again, this time followed by the sound of paper sliding under the door. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. "Running won't save you. I'll always find you." I didn't sleep that night or the next or the one after that. Days turned to weeks, my exhaustion so profound I felt like I was slipping into another world, one where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred. And then, one night, he stopped playing games. I woke to the sound of breathing, deep, slow, steady, coming from the foot of my bed. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and there he was, sitting there like he belonged, his head tilted, his face obscured by the shadows. "I've been waiting for you to notice me," he said, his voice a rasp that scraped against my sanity. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was frozen, my body betraying me as he leaned closer, the metallic glint of a knife catching the faint light from the window. "Now we can finally be together," he whispered, and as the blade descended, I realized with horrifying clarity that he had never been outside looking in. He had always been inside, watching, waiting, hiding in the one place I thought I was safe. It began as a faint flicker on my TV screen, an occasional distortion in the late hours when the world outside was quiet, and I was alone in my dimly lit apartment. At first, I thought it was a technical issue, perhaps the cables or the signal, but then the flickering became more frequent, the static stretching into something that felt alive, almost purposeful. One night, as I sat on my couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, the screen went black before erupting into a cascade of static, and amidst the chaos, I saw it. A face, pale and featureless, staring out at me from the noise. I froze, my breath hitching as I leaned closer, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light. But the face moved, its empty eyes locking onto mine before vanishing into the static. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But the next night, it happened again, and this time, the face lingered longer, its mouth stretching into a twisted smile as if it could see me watching. I unplugged the TV, heart pounding, and went to bed, but sleep eluded me. Every creak of the apartment, every shadow on the wall taking on a sinister shape. Over the next few days, I started noticing other things. My phone would buzz with unknown numbers that hung up as soon as I answered. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed delayed, moving a fraction of a second after I did, and my radio would turn on by itself, static blaring before a low, distorted voice whispered my name. Then the notes began appearing, left in places I couldn't explain. On the kitchen counter, under my pillow, even inside the locked drawer of my desk. They were written in smudged ink, the letters shaky and uneven, saying things like, "I'm closer than you think," "You're never alone," and "Turn around." I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was a prank or a figment of my overworked mind. But the fear was unshakable, a weight that settled deep in my chest. One night, as I sat in the living room, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing to fear, the TV turned on by itself, the screen erupting into static. I grabbed the remote, my fingers trembling as I tried to turn it off. But the power button didn't work, and the static grew louder, the face reappearing in the chaos. This time, it spoke, its voice low and guttural, each word dragging like a claw across my spine. "I've always been here." The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness, and for a moment, I thought I could see the shape of something standing in the corner, a shadow darker than the night itself. I fled to my bedroom, barricading the door with furniture, my heart racing as I clutched my phone. But when I tried to call for help, all I heard was static, the same voice now whispering on the other end, "You can't hide from me." I didn't sleep that night, every noise outside my door sounding like footsteps, every shadow stretching closer. But when morning came, everything was silent, the world outside seemingly normal. I considered leaving, packing a bag and running far away, but something held me back, a twisted curiosity or perhaps a fear that no matter where I went, it would follow. Days turned into weeks, and the phenomenon only grew worse. The face began appearing in other screens, reflections, even in my dreams, its voice now a constant whisper in the back of my mind, eroding my sanity. One night, desperate for answers, I smashed the TV with a hammer, the screen shattering into 1,000 pieces. But as I stared at the broken glass, I saw it again. Its face, clearer now, staring up at me from the shards. "You can't destroy me," it said, the voice no longer coming from the shattered TV but from the room itself, as if the walls were speaking. That was when I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck, the undeniable presence of someone standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, paralyzed by the knowledge that whatever was there wasn't human, wasn't real, but was somehow more terrifying than anything I could imagine. The next morning, I woke to find the words were one now, carved into the wall above my bed, the letters jagged and deep as if clawed into the plaster. I haven't seen my reflection since. The mirror shows only static now, and every screen I pass flickers to life, the face smiling at me as if it's always been waiting. I no longer know where I end and it begins, but I know one thing for sure: there's no escape. It started with a single, insignificant thing: a pair of footprints in the snow beneath my bedroom window. I live on the second floor, so I shrugged it off as coincidence. A stray passerby who must have wandered too close, but deep down it didn't sit right. The footprints were spaced apart, as if someone had stood there for a while, lingering in the freezing cold, staring up at my window. The thought was unsettling, but I convinced myself to forget it until the next morning, when I found another set of prints, perfectly mirroring the ones from the day before, pressed deeper into the snow, as though someone had returned to the same spot, standing in silence, watching. I closed my curtains that night, locking the windows tight and telling myself it was probably nothing, just some neighborhood kid playing pranks. But the unease clung to me like a shadow. The next night, the tapping started. It was faint, almost polite, a light rapping against the glass that sent a shiver up my spine. My heart pounded as I peered through the curtains, half expecting to see someone staring back at me, but the yard was empty. Still, the footprints remained, now multiplied and crisscrossing in bizarre patterns, circling the base of the house. Sleep became impossible, my nights consumed by the haunting sound of faint footsteps crunching in the snow, pacing just out of sight. Things escalated quickly after that. First, there were the scratches on the window, long, jagged lines etched into the glass as though someone had dragged their fingernails down the surface. And then came the notes, crude messages scrawled in a spidery hand on torn paper and left under my door. I see you. You're beautiful when you sleep. Don't close the curtains. I miss your face. Each note felt like a dagger, plunging into my sanity and twisting until I couldn't bear to stay in the house. I went to the police, but they dismissed me with vague promises to patrol the area, their disinterest clear in their hollow reassurances. Desperate, I bought security cameras and set them up around the property, convinced that proof would force someone to take me seriously. The first night I reviewed the footage, my blood turned to ice. At 3:14 a.m., a figure emerged from the tree line, a tall, lanky man wearing a hood that obscured most of his face. He didn't hesitate as he approached the house, stopping directly below my bedroom window. For the next 3 hours, he stood motionless, staring up at the camera with a wide, unnerving grin that sent chills down my spine. When I rushed to the window to see if he was still there, the yard was empty, but the footprints in the snow were fresh, pressed deep into the earth as though he had only just left. My sense of safety evaporated entirely when the cameras caught him again the following night. Not outside this time, but inside the house. The footage showed him entering through the basement, his movements slow and deliberate as he made his way upstairs. The worst part was watching him stand at the foot of my bed, his gaunt face illuminated by the faint glow of the camera as he reached out to touch my hair. I didn't wake up. I had no idea he had been there until I saw the footage, and by then the damage was done. My locks were useless, my walls paper thin. He could get in any time he wanted, and he knew it. I stayed with a friend after that, too terrified to return home, but the notes followed me, appearing on my car windshield and slipped into my bag when I wasn't looking. The messages grew darker, more personal. You can't escape. You're mine. My friends swore they hadn't seen anyone, but I knew he was watching, always watching. One night, as I lay awake in the spare room, the sound of my phone buzzing broke the silence. It was a video file sent from an unknown number. My hands shook as I opened it, and my stomach dropped when I saw what it was. A recording of me, sleeping, taken from inside the room I was in. The realization hit me like a freight train. He was already here, somewhere in the house, waiting. My breath caught as I scanned the darkness, every shadow and corner now a potential hiding place, But before I could move, the closet door creaked open, and I knew I was no longer alone. It started as a faint tapping noise late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, a rhythmic, almost deliberate sound coming from the floorboards beneath my bed. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling. Old buildings have their quirks after all. But when the tapping became more frequent, more deliberate, and always around the same time, I couldn't ignore it. I told myself it was mice or maybe the pipes, but a part of me felt the gnawing suspicion that it was something else, something I couldn't see but could feel creeping closer every night. Then came the whispering, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to seep up from the cracks in the floor, words I couldn't quite catch but felt in my bones. It wasn't until I found the first note, slipped under the door to my bedroom, that I began to understand the gravity of what was happening. It was scrawled on yellowed paper in uneven handwriting, "You're not alone." My heart raced as I stared at it, every fiber of my being screaming that I was being watched. I searched the entire house, checked every lock and window, but nothing was out of place, except for the basement door, which was slightly ajar despite my never using it. I bolted it shut, but the next morning, it was open again, just a crack, as if inviting me down. I refused to go, telling myself it was just a draft or maybe my own forgetfulness. But the tapping continued, louder now, and accompanied by a scratching sound like nails against wood. The whispers grew clearer, phrases like, "I see you," and "come find me," seeping into my ears as I lay frozen in my bed. I started finding more notes, tucked into my coat pockets, slipped between the pages of my books, even inside the refrigerator. Each one was more unsettling than the last. "I love the way you hum when you're scared. You look so peaceful when you sleep. We'll be together soon." The police didn't believe me when I showed them the notes, their skepticism thinly veiled as they suggested I might be writing them myself. But I knew better. I knew someone was in my house, watching me, studying me, waiting for something. One night, unable to take it anymore, I decided to confront whatever was happening. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I descended into the basement, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The walls were lined with cobwebs, the smell of mildew thick and oppressive, but the tapping and scratching were louder now, almost deafening as I reached the far corner. That's when I saw it. A loose floorboard slightly raised, as if it had been pried up and replaced hastily. My hands trembled as I pulled it free, revealing a hidden compartment, and inside, I found a collection of objects that made my stomach churn. Photographs of me at every stage of my life, locks of my hair tied with string, and a journal filled with detailed accounts of my daily routines, written in handwriting that wasn't mine. But the worst part was the final page, which simply read, "She'll find me tonight." A cold dread washed over me as I realized the whispers were no longer coming from beneath the floorboards. They were behind me. I spun around, my flashlight casting a weak beam into the darkness. And there he was, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with an unsettling mix of adoration and malice. "You've finally found me," he said, his voice the same whisper that had haunted my nights. He moved closer, the crowbar shaking in my grip as I backed away, but the stairs were behind me, and I stumbled, falling hard as he loomed over me. "You can't leave," he murmured, reaching out a hand, and in a moment of pure terror, I swung the crowbar with all my strength. It connected with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the floor, his body eerily still. I ran, adrenaline fueling me as I fled the house, but when I returned with the police, there was no body, no hidden compartment, no evidence of the nightmare I had endured. The notes were gone, the floorboards undisturbed, and the whispers silent. But every night since, as I try to sleep, I hear the tapping again, soft and insistent, reminding me that he's still there, waiting, always waiting. It started so subtly that I almost didn't notice. The feeling of being watched, that prickling awareness at the back of my neck whenever I walked home after dark. I would glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there, but the street was always empty, the air still except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I chalked it up to paranoia, the byproduct of too many late-night horror movies. But the unease lingered, growing heavier with each passing day. The first time I was certain something was wrong was when I found the photograph. A picture of me walking home, taken from behind. It had been slipped under my apartment door while I was out, and scrawled across the back in smudged black ink were the words, "I like the way you move." My heart hammered as I stared at it, the implications too horrifying to process. I told myself it was a cruel prank, maybe one of my coworkers playing a sick joke, but the thought didn't bring any comfort. That night, I locked every door and window, drawing the curtains tightly shut. But sleep was impossible, every creak and groan of the old building making my skin crawl. The next morning, I found another photo, this one of me sitting at my desk at work, my headphones on, completely unaware of the camera lens trained on me. This time, the note read, "You're so peaceful when you're focused." Couldn't breathe. Whoever this was, they were close, closer than I wanted to admit, and they weren't stopping. I reported it to the police, but they dismissed me with the usual platitudes, saying there wasn't much they could do without evidence of a crime. The pictures kept coming, each one more invasive than the last. Me shopping for groceries, me sitting in a cafe, me standing at my bedroom window staring out into the night. The worst was the one I found a week later, left on my kitchen counter even though I hadn't let anyone inside. It showed me sleeping in my bed, the angle suggesting the photo had been taken from just a few feet away. That was when the terror truly set in, the realization that this person had been inside my home, watching me while I slept. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and stopped going out unless absolutely necessary, but none of it seemed to matter. The cameras never caught anything, and yet the photos kept coming, always left in places that proved they had been here. On my pillow, in my closet, even taped to my bathroom mirror. I started hearing noises at night, faint tapping on the windows, the creak of floorboards when I knew I was alone, and once, the sound of breathing just outside my bedroom door. I stayed up with a knife clutched in my hand, too scared to move, but when morning came, the apartment was empty. The only evidence of their presence, another photo left on the kitchen table. This one showed me sitting in my living room, staring at the camera with wide, terrified eyes. My resolve shattered, and I decided to leave, packing a bag and heading to a friend's house across town. For a few days, things seemed normal. I started to believe I'd finally escaped, but then the photos started showing up there too. The first was tucked under my friend's windshield wiper, a grainy image of us sitting together in her living room. The second was slipped into my purse while we were out shopping, and the third appeared on the pillow beside me one morning, the ink on the back still damp as it read, "I'll always find you." I knew then that running wasn't an option, that no matter where I went, they would follow. Desperation drove me to confront the unknown, to set up cameras and stay awake all night, waiting to catch them in the act. What I saw on the footage chilled me to my core. At 2:47 a.m., the figure appeared, a tall, gaunt silhouette slipping through the shadows with unnerving ease. They moved to my bedroom door, pressing their face to the wood as though listening, before slowly turning to the camera. Their face was obscured by a mask, pale and featureless, but their movements were deliberate, as if they knew I was watching. The video cut off abruptly, and when I went to check the camera, I found it smashed to pieces, the memory card missing. I haven't slept since. Every shadow feels alive, every sound a prelude to their return. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I know they're always watching, always waiting, and there's nothing I can do to stop them.